Chapter 87. And again I saw how they began to gore each other, and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. And I raised mine eyes again to heaven, and I saw in the vision, and behold, there came forth from heaven beings who were like white men. And four went forth from that place, and three with them. And those three that had lost come forth grasped me by my hand, and took me up away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a lofty place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. And one said unto me, Remain here till thou seest everything that befalls those elephants, camels, and asses, and the stars, and the oxen, and all of them. Chapter 88. And I saw one of those four who had come forth first, and he seized that first star which had fallen from the heaven, and bound it hand and foot, and cast it into the abyss. Now the abyss was narrow and deep, and horrible and dark. And one of them drew a sword, and gave it to those elephants and camels and asses. Then they began to smite each other, and the whole earth quaked because of them. And as I was beholding in the vision, lo, one of those four who had come forth stoned them from heaven, and gathered and took all the great stars whose privy members were like those of horses, and bound them all hand and foot, and cast them in the abyss of the earth. Chapter 89. And one of those four went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret, without his being terrified. And he was born and bold, and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel, and dwelt thereon. And three bulls dwelt with him in that vessel, and they were covered in. And again I raised mine eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof, with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed in much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of the great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, and the mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of the water, that water had risen above the height of that enclosure, and was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But that vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen, elephants, and camel and asses sank to the bottom with all the other animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. And again I saw in the vision till those water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these till the earth became visible. But these vessels settled in the earth. And the darkness retired and light appeared. But that white bull which had become a man came out of that vessel, and the 3 bulls with him. And of those 3, white like that bull, and one of them was a red as blood, and one black, and the white bull departed from them. And they began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that these arose different genera: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens. And among them was a horn of a white bull. And they began to bite one another. But that white bull which was born amongst them begat a wild ass, and a white bull with it. And the wild asses multiplied. But that bull, which was born from him, begat a black wild boar, and white sheep. And the former begat many boars, but that sheep begat 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses, and those asses again gave up the sheep to the wolves. And the sheep grew up among the wolves. And the Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it and pasture with it among the wolves. And they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. And the wolves began to fear them, and they oppressed them until they destroyed their little ones. And they cast their young into a river of much water. But those sheep began to cry aloud on account of the little ones, and to complain unto the Lord. And the sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild asses. And I saw the sheep how they lamented and cried, and besought their Lord with all their might, till that Lord of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a lofty abode, and came to them and pastured them. And he called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spake with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep. And the sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the Lord. And another sheep met it, and went with it. And the 2 went and entered together into assembly of those wolves, and spake with them, and admonished them not to touch the sheep from henceforth. And thereupon I saw the wolves, and how they oppressed the sheep exceedingly with all their power. And the sheep cried aloud. And the Lord came to the sheep, and they began to smite those wolves, and the wolves began to make lamentation. But the sheep became quiet, and forthwith ceased to cry out. And I saw the sheep till they departed from amongst the wolves. But the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and those wolves departed in pursuit of the sheep with all their power. And the Lord of the sheep went with him as their leader, and all his sheep followed him. And his face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep till they reached the sea of water. And that sea was divided, and water stood in the side, and on that before their face. And the Lord led them and placed himself between them and the wolves. And as those wolves did not yet see the sheep, they proceeded into the midst of that sea. And the wolves followed the sheep, and those wolves ran after them into that sea. And when they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to flee before his face. But that sea gathered itself together, and became as it had been created. And the water swelled, and rose till it covered those wolves. And I saw till all the wolves who pursued these sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep escaped from that water, and went forth into a wilderness, where there was no water and no grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. And I saw the Lord of the sheep pasturing them, and giving them water and grass, and that sheep going and leading them. And the sheep ascended to the summit of that lofty rock, and the Lord of the sheep ascended with them. And after that I saw the Lord of the sheep who stood before them, and his appearance was great and terrible and majestic. And all the sheep saw him and were afraid of his face. And they all feared and trembled because of him. And they cried to that sheep with them, which was amongst them, We are not able to stand before our Lord or to behold him. And that sheep which led them again ascended to the summit of that rock. But the sheep began to be blinded and to wander from the way which he had showed them. But the sheep were not thereof. And the Lord of the sheep was wrathful exceedingly against them. And that sheep discovered it, and went forth from the summit of the rock, and came to the sheep, and found the greatest part of them blinded and fallen away. And when they saw it, they feared and trembled at his presence, and desired to return to their folds. And that sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And the sheep feared his presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and returned to their flocks. And I saw in the vision till that sheep became a man, and built a house of the Lord of the sheep, and placed all the sheep in that house. And I saw till the sheep which had met that sheep which led them fell asleep. And I saw till all the great sheep perished, and little ones arose in their place, and they came to a pasture, and approached the stream of water. Then that sheep, the leader which had become a man, withdrew from them and fell asleep. And all the sheep sought it and cried over it with great crying. And I saw till they left a crying, and for that sheep crossed a stream of water. And there arose the two sheep as leaders in the place of those which led them and fallen asleep. And I saw till the sheep came to a goodly place, and a pleasant and glorious land. And I saw till those sheep were satisfied, that house stood amongst them in a pleasant land. And sometimes their eyes were opened, and sometimes blinded, till another sheep arose and led them back, and then their eyes were opened. And the dogs and the foxes and the wild boars began to devour those sheep, till the Lord of the sheep raised up another sheep, a ram from the midst, which led them. And that ram began to butt on either side those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, till he had destroyed them all. And that sheep, whose eyes were open, saw that ram, which was amongst the sheep, till it forsook its glory, and began to butt those sheep, and trampled upon them, and behaved itself unseemly. And the Lord of the sheep sent the lamb to another lamb, and raised it to being a ram and leader of the sheep, instead of that ram which had forsaken its glory. And it went to it, and spake to it alone, and it raised to being a ram, and made it the prince and leader of the sheep. But during all these things those dogs oppressed the sheep. And the first ram pursued the second, pulled down the first ram. And the second ram arose and led that little sheep. And those sheep grew and multiplied, but all the dogs and foxes and wild boars feared and fled before it. And that ram butt and kicked, and the wild beasts, and all those wild beasts had no longer any power amongst the sheep, and robbed them more of aught. And that ram begat many sheep and fell asleep, and a little sheep became ram in its stead, and became prince and leader of those sheep. And that house became great and broad, and it was built for those sheep. And a tower, lofty, great, was built on the house of the Lord of the sheep. And that house was low, but the tower was elevated and lofty. And the Lord of the sheep stood in that tower, and they offered a full table before him. And again I saw those sheep, that they again erred and went many ways, and forsook that their house. And the Lord of the sheep called some from amongst the sheep, and sent them back to the sheep, but the sheep began to slay them. And one of them was saved and was not slain, and it sped away and cried aloud over the sheep. And they sought to slay it, but the Lord of the sheep saved it from the sheep, and brought it up to me, and caused it to dwell there. And many other sheep he sent to those sheep to testify unto them, and lament over them. And after that I saw, when they forsook the house of the Lord and his tower, they fell away entirely, and their eyes were blinded. And I saw the Lord of the sheep, how he wrought much slaughter amongst them in their herds, until those sheep invited and slaughtered and betrayed his place. And he began them over into the hands of the lions and tigers, and the wolves and the hyenas, and until the hand of the foxes and the wild beasts. And those wild beasts began to tear into pieces those sheep. And I saw that he forsook their house and their tower, and gave them all into the hand of the lions to tear and devour them, in the hand of the wild beast. And I began to cry aloud with all my power, to appeal to the Lord of sheep, and represent to him in regard to that sheep that they are devoured by all the wild beasts. But he remained unmoved, though he saw it, and rejoiced that they were devoured and swallowed and robbed, and left them to be devoured in the hand of all the beasts. And he called 70 shepherds, and cast those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. And he spake to the shepherds and their companions, Let each individual of your pasture the sheep henceforth, and everything that I shall command you, that do ye. And I will deliver them over unto you duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy, yea. And he gave over unto them those sheep. And he called another and spake unto them, Observe, and mark everything that the shepherds will do to these sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded them. And every excess and the destruction which will rot through the shepherds, record namely how many that they destroy, according to my command, and how many according to their own caprice. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, and read out before me by the number how many they destroy, and how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have in this testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may comprehend and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and they shall not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all destruction which the shepherds effect each in his time, and lay it all before me. And I saw to those shepherds pastured in their season, and they began to slay and to destroy more than they were bidden. And they delivered those sheep into the hands of the lions. And the lions and tigers eat and devoured the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars eat along with them. And they burnt that tower and demolished that house. And I became exceedingly sorrowful over that tower, because the house of the sheep was demolished. And afterwards I was unable to see if those sheep entered the house. And the shepherds and their associates delivered over those sheep to all the wild beasts to devour them. And each one of them received in his time a definite number. It was written by the other in a book how many each one of them destroyed of them. And each one slew and destroyed many more than was prescribed. And I began to weep and lament on account of those sheep. And thus in the vision I saw the one who wrote, how he wrote down every one that was destroyed by those shepherds day by day, and carried and laid down and showed actually the whole book to the Lord of the sheep, even everything that they had done, and all that each of them had made away with, and all that they had given over to destruction. And the book was read before the Lord of the sheep. And he took the book from his hand, and read it, and sealed it, and laid it down. And forthwith I saw how shepherds pastured for 12 hours. And behold, 3 of those sheep turned back, and came and entered, and began to build up all that had fallen down of that house. But the wild boars tried to hinder them, but they were not able to. And they began again to build as before. And they reared up that tower, and it was named the High Tower. And they began to place a table before the tower. But all the bread on it was polluted and not pure. And as touching all the eyes of those sheep were blinded, so they saw not, and the eyes of their shepherds likewise. And they delivered them in large numbers to the shepherds for destruction. And they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. And the Lord of the sheep remained unmoved till all the sheep were disposed over the field and mingled with them. And they did not save them out of the hand of the beast. And this one who wrote the book carried it up, and showed it, and read it before the Lord of the sheep, and implored him on their account, and besought him on their account, as he showed him all the doings of the shepherds, and gave testimony before him against all the shepherds. And he took the actual book, and laid it down beside him, and departed. Chapter 90. And I saw till that, in a manner, 35 shepherds undertook the pasturing of the sheep. They severely completed their periods, as did the first, and the others received them into their hands, to pasture them for the period, each shepherd in his own period. And after that I saw in my vision all the birds of heaven coming, the eagles, the vultures, the kites, the ravens, but the eagles led all the birds. And they began to devour those sheep, and to pick out their eyes and devour their flesh. And the sheep cried out because their flesh was being devoured by the birds. And as for me, I looked and lamented in my sleep over the shepherd who pastured the sheep. And I saw until those sheep were devoured by the dogs and eagles and kites, and they left neither flesh nor skin nor sinew remaining on them, till only their bones stood there. And their bones too fell to the earth, and the sheep became few. And I saw until that 23 had undertaken the pasturing, completed in their several periods of 58 times. But behold, lambs were born by those white sheep, and they began to open their eyes and to see, and to cry to the sheep. Yea, they cried to them, but they did not hearken to what they said to them, but were exceedingly deaf, and their eyes were exceedingly blinded. And I saw in the vision how the ravens flew up upon those lambs, and took one of those lambs, and dashed the sheep in pieces, and devoured them. And I saw till horns grew up upon those lambs, and the ravens cast down their horns. And I saw till there sprouted a great horn of one of those sheep, and their eyes were opened, and it looked at them, and their eyes opened, and it cried to the sheep. And the rams saw it, and ran to it. And notwithstanding all those eagles and vultures and ravens and kites still kept tearing the sheep, and swooping down upon them, and devouring them. Still the sheep remained silent, but the rams lamented and cried out. And those ravens fought and battled with it, and sought to lay low its horn, but they had no power over it. And I saw till the shepherds and eagles and those vultures and kites came, and they cried to the ravens that they should break the horn of that ram, that they battled and fought with it, and battled with them, and cried that its help might come. And I saw till that man who wrote down the names of the shepherds, and carried up until the presence of the Lord of the sheep, came and helped it, and showed it in everything he had come down for the help of that ram. And I saw till the shepherd of the sheep, came unto them in wrath, and all who saw him fled. And they all fell into his shadow from before his face. And all the eagles and vultures and ravens and kites were gathered together, and there came with them the sheep of the field. Yea, they all came together and helped others to break that horn of the ram. And I saw a man who wrote the book according to the command of the Lord, till he opened the book concerning the destruction which those 12 shepherds had wrought, and showed them that they had destroyed much of that predecessors before the Lord of the sheep. And I saw till the Lord of the sheep came unto them, and took it in his hands and staff of his wrath, and smote the earth, and the earth clave asunder. And all the beasts and the birds of the heaven fell from among those sheep, and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them. And I saw till a great sword was given to that sheep, and the shepherd proceeded against all the beasts. And I saw till a throne was erected in the pleasant land, and the Lord of the sheep sat himself thereon. And another took the sealed books, and opened those before the Lord of the sheep. And the Lord called those men, the 7 first white ones, and commanded that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star which led the way, all the stars whose privy members were like those of horses, and they brought them all before him. And he said to that man who wrote before him, being one of those 7 white ones, and said unto him, take those 70 shepherds to whom I delivered the sheep, and who were taking them on their own authority, slew more than I commanded them. And behold, they were all bound. And I saw, they all stood before him. And the judgments were held first over the stars, and they were judged and found guilty, and went to the place of condemnation. And they were cast into the abyss, full of fire and flaming, and full of pillars of fire. And those 70 shepherds were judged and found guilty, and they were cast into the fiery abyss. And I saw at that time how a like abyss was opened in the midst of the earth, full of fire. And they brought those blinded sheep. And they were all judged and found guilty, and cast into the fiery abyss. And they burned. Now this abyss was to the right of that house. And I saw those sheep burning, and their bones burning. And I stood up to see till they folded up that old house, and carried off all the pillars, and all beams of ornaments, and houses were at the same folded up with it. And they carried it off, and laid it in its place in the south of the land. And I saw till the Lord of the sheep brought a new house greater and loftier than the first, and set it up in the place of the first, which had bare folded up. And its pillars were new, and its ornaments were new, and larger than those of the first, the old in which he had taken away, and all the sheep were with it. And I saw all the sheep which had been left, and all the beasts in the earth, and all the birds of the heaven, falling down and doing homage to those sheep, and making petition to and obeying them in everything. And thereafter those three who were clothed in white and had seized me by my hand, who had taken me up before, and the hand of that ram also seizing hold of me, they took me up and set me down in the midst of those sheep before the judgment took place. And those sheep were all white, and their wool was abundant and clean. And all that had been destroyed and dispersed, and all the beasts of the field, and all the birds of the heaven assembled in that house. And the Lord of the sheep rejoiced with great joy, because they were all good and had returned to his house. And I saw till they all laid down that sword which had been given to the sheep, and they brought it back into that house, and it was sealed before the presence of the Lord. And all the sheep were invited into that house, but it held them not. And the eyes of them were all opened, and they saw the good, and there was not one among them they did not see. And I saw that that house was large and broad and very full. And I saw that a white bull was born with large horns, and all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air feared him and made petition to him all the time. And I saw till all the generations were transformed, and they all became white bulls. And the first among them became a lamb, and that lamb became a great animal, and had great black horns on its head. And the Lord of the sheep rejoiced over it and over all the oxen. And I slept in their midst, and I awoke and saw everything. This is the vision which I saw while I slept. And I awoke and blessed the Lord of righteousness, and gave him glory. Then I wept with a great weeping, and my tears stayed not till I could no longer endure it. When I saw, they flowed on account of what I had seen. For everything shall come and be fulfilled, and all the deeds of men in their order were shown to me. On that night I remembered the first dream, and because of it I wept and was troubled, because I had seen that vision. Chapter 91. And now, my son Methuselah, call to me all thy brothers, and gather together to me all the sons of thy mother. For the word calls me, and the Spirit is poured out upon me, that I may show you everything that shall befall you forever. And thereupon Methuselah went and summoned to him all his brothers, and assembled his relatives. And he spake unto all the children of righteousness, and said, Hear, you sons of Enoch, all the words of your father, and hearken aright to the voice of my mouth. For I exhort you and say unto you, beloved, love uprightness and walk thereon, and draw not nigh to uprightness with a double heart, and associate not with those of double heart, but walk in righteousness, my sons. And it shall guide you in good paths, and righteousness shall be your companion. For I know that violence must increase on the earth, and a great chastisement be executed on the earth, and all uprightness came to an end. It shall be cut off from its roots, and its whole structure be destroyed. And uprightness shall again be consummated on the earth, and all the deeds of uprightness and of violence and transgression shall prevail in a twofold degree. And when sin and unrightness and blasphemy and violence and all kinds of deeds increase, and apostasy and transgressions and uncleanness increase, a great chastisement shall come from heaven upon all these. And the Holy Lord will come forth with wrath and chastisement to execute judgment on earth. And in those days violence shall be cut off from its roots, and the roots of uprightness together with deceit, and they shall be destroyed from under heaven. And all the idols of the heaven shall be abandoned, and the temples burned with fire, and they shall be removed them from the whole earth. And they, the heathen, shall be cast into the judgment of fire, and shall perish in wrath and grievous judgment forever. And the righteous shall rise from their sleep, and wisdom shall rise and be given unto them. And after that the roots of uprightness shall be cut off, and the sinners shall be destroyed by the sword. Shall be cut off from blasphemers in every place, and those who plan violence and those who commit blasphemy shall perish by the sword. And now I tell you, my sons, and show you the paths of righteousness and the paths of violence. Yea, I will show them to you again, that ye may know what will come to pass. Now hearken unto me, my sons, and walk in the paths of righteousness, and walk not in the paths of violence. For all who walk in the paths of unrighteousness shall perish forever.